It's rather undeniable that Black Sabbath formed one of the cornerstones of heavy metal, having the lion's share of early influence on so many subgenres, be they heavy, goth, doom, or even more extreme forms when you consider lyrics and imagery. So in this video, I'll be counting down my 20 favorite Black Sabbath songs, as well as getting into some detail on each track. Stay tuned. Starting with the track from their fourth studio album, logically titled Volume 4, released in 1972 by Warner Brothers. This is Tomorrow's Dream. And in case you're confused, this is the edition from the modern box set release with alternate artwork, so you're definitely not imagining things. Anyways, track opens with a super doomy and fuzzed out riff, though of the slow gallop variety. Ozzy's vocals are shouty and sometimes melodic, but the power really is in the riff. The chorus takes an interesting turn from heavy to an almost dreamy acoustic-electric combo, but then back to the crunch. Solo begins with a strange pitch increase sound effect behind it, but the solo is a bit short, so we're back into the verse and chorus run through at this point, and then the ending chorus rings out to fade. This was also Sabbath's main single from the album, with Laguna Sunrise as the B-side. Also, the band had performed Tomorrow's Dream almost 70 times in their career. So at number 20 is Tomorrow's Dream. Next up is a song from their third studio album, Master Reality, released in 1971 by Warner Brothers. This is Into the Void. So a doomy and isolated riff is soon joined by the others for the first minute or so, but then the verse riff with its infectious headbanging crunch kicks in, and all of a sudden you can hear why so many stoner doom bands base their entire sound on this band, and this era specifically. Ozzy sings along with the riff, which is highly common for him, and we might mention that a couple more times later on. Then around the 3-minute mark, the riffing switches major gears around bridge time and jumps into an almost boogie style, but still doomy as hell. Then back to the verse riff, and then some heavy groove soloing takes us to slamming chords, and then the final solo and end riff fade out. No real chorus in this track, relying heavily on verses throughout. Very simple song, but heavy and effective, not to mention a decent album ender. Sabbath had performed this track live around 425 times in their career, making it their 13th most played song in a concert setting. Also, this never was an official single, though an unissued acetate for it was pressed in 1971, but not approved by the studio. Of course, metal fans know that this song was also covered by Ex-Hoarder, namely on their second studio album, The Law, released in 1992. A decent cover that is well worth checking out. So at number 19 is Into the Void. Next is a track from their 16th studio album, Dehumanizer, released in 1992 by IRS Records. This is Letters from Earth. So track kicks in right away with slamming drums and a slow head-banging riff, keeping that traditional doomy Sab vibe, but bringing in some more modern metal delivery. Modern, that is, for its time. Dio's vocals are almost forlorn, but still powerful, and it's clear that the time spent in his solo band really propelled Ronnie to exude more punch and aggression in his vocal style, and he brings that over to the Dehumanizer record as well. Solo work here is at times shreddy, wailing, and again a more modern Iommi overall. I especially dig the end solo that takes us out with more of that classic meets modern approach. Unfortunately, the track was never a single, though it was on the B-side of the TV Crime single, but as an alternate version. Also, it was performed live only once in the band's entire career, namely in Mesa, Arizona in November of 1992. So if you saw that show, that was the only chance to hear it live. So at number 18 is Letters from Earth. Next up is a song from their 11th studio album, Born Again, released in 1983 by Warner Brothers. This is Trashed. So a steady rock riff underscores the wailing but punchy vocals from one-time Sabbath singer Ian Gillan, formerly and then later from Deep Purple. Gillan brings something very different to Sabbath from the previous vocalists with his brand of soulful, screamy, and overall impactful singing. Love the guitar chord strikes to accent his delivery in the chorus, adding some extra punch. The steady verse riffing returns, and I'm reminded of how, along with the lyrics, it's a good musical approximation of the chaos and insanity of driving drunk and speeding into total oblivion, which of course is what this song's actually about. It really has that immediacy to it. Another chorus follows, leading straight into the bridge, then into the manic soloing, very reminiscent of earlier Sabbath from the 1970s. After another return to the bridge, it jumps back to that driving verse, so to speak. Really digging Ian's screams in this track. He hits some crazed and forceful notes a couple times here, and they're totally blood-curdling and awesome. Keep an ear out for them. Anyways, after that, the track fades out with the final solo. So according to all available information, Trashed has never been performed live by the band, even though it is the lead and only single from the record, with Zero the Hero on the B-side. Speaking of which, we might talk about that B-side track a little bit more later on. Anyways, Trashed also had a music video, which is a fun watch. You should definitely check that one out when you can. So at number 17 is Trashed. Next is a track from their 9th studio album, Heaven and Hell, released in 1980 by Warner Brothers. This is Children of the Sea. So the track begins with an acoustic guitar passage, setting the somber mood for Dio's melancholic vocals. After 30 seconds or so, Dio's final note rings out and holds, while a drum lead-in brings us to a slow and heavy verse riff. Ronnie takes on some more melodic aggression here, but switches over to mournful vocals for the chorus, combining heavy and somber moods into one. It would be easy to call this a power ballad overall, but there's so much more power here than ballad, so keep that in mind. Really digging the bass on this track, with plenty of fills and flourishes between guitar chords. Anyways, after another run through verse and chorus, the riff takes a darker turn and is joined by some low choral vocals in the background, eerily reminiscent of those on Superzar from their Sabotage album, an album I'll be mentioning a couple more times later on. Anyways, soloing comes in at this point, but then leads back to the acoustic passage from the opener, along with eerie wind sounds and once more with Dio's haunting vocal melody. Then a return to the chorus, and then the end segment with Dio's now infamous "Look Out" shouts, and then an abrupt ending from all. The song itself was not a single, but did appear as a B-side in studio form on the Lady Evil single, and then a live version on the B-side of the Neon Night single. Also, the song was covered by Jag Panzer on the Holy Dio compilation tribute album from Century Media back in 1999. This was also the very first song written for Heaven and Hell, but it was also the very first Sabbath song written post-Ozzy. It had also been performed over 360 times live by the band, making it the 14th most played track in concert. So this used to be my very favorite song on this album back when I was a teenager, though it got replaced by my number 12 choice, which we'll discuss in a bit. Still have a whole lot of love for this song, though, which is why it's on my list. So at number 16 is Children of the Sea. Next up is a song from their 5th studio album, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, released in 1973 by Warner Brothers. This is Killing Yourself to Live. So the track opens with a mid-paced boogie riff intermixed with single chords for accent, but then changes over to a more psychedelic guitar line with some background trippy synth. Ozzy's melodic shout style is here, and I love how he holds out his final verse note while the chorus riff comes in. And what a riff! I mean, if I had a top 10 Sabbath riff list, this chorus would be very high on it. Such a killer, heavy, doomy, and crushing riff. After Ozzy sings the song title a couple times, we do another run through verse and chorus, which reminds me of how short these parts are. I mean, verse is only 4 lines and chorus is only 2, with a lot of lyrics coming in towards the final segment. Anyways, the chorus is short but super powerful, again with that massive riff. But after some soloing, we get a bridge of sorts that borrows the chorus riff, but with a different vocal melody and additional lyrics. Really love this part as well. And since it's Black Sabbath, Ozzy then tells us to smoke it and to get high before it soon enough leads into a jam passage, which actually weighs the track down a little bit. It's not awful, and it's not a deal breaker, it's just a tad extraneous. It later picks up the pace of it, but it's still pretty jammy. It also feels like 2 songs just got slapped together. Even still, I do dig this track, imperfect as it is. Also, we're going to talk very shortly about another track with a jam part in it, and a far more egregious example as well. Stay tuned for that. So, not a single, not a hit, and not a top pick for cover song. It had only been played a little over 65 times live, so also not popping up a lot in their former set lists. But it's still a good song along with a killer chorus riff, so it makes my list right here. Anyways, at number 15 is Killing Yourself to Live. Next is a track from their 6th studio album, Sabotage, released in 1975 by Warner Brothers. This is Symptom of the Universe. So the track opens with a chugging, isolated guitar riff, but soon joined by the rest, including a driving bass line and some sweet drum fills throughout. Really dig Ozzy's vocals on this one, definitely in the screechier mode, mixed with some occasionally effective shouts. He does hit some sour notes, so it's not technically proficient, but effective nevertheless. No real choruses here, but the song title is tacked onto the end of verse parts. Anyways, after another verse and some more drum gymnastics, we get a boogie passage, quickly jumping into frenetic solo work. But at the 4:12 mark, the tempo is brought down out of nowhere, and we get an acoustic jam session, which is fine, but it also feels tacked on to the end. Would have preferred the track ended heavy, and that seems implied on Ozzy's Speak of the Devil live album, as that version of the song cuts out that entire part. Had the part not been here, I would have ranked the Sabotage version a bit higher. Again, not an unbearable segment, but also not really needed. Of course, the most memorable cover version of this track, which also cuts out the jam band part, is the one by Brazilian thrash band Sepultura, with the track having appeared on the Nativity in Black compilation tribute album from 1994 with a slew of other bands. Seriously, go check out that version of the song. It's amazing, and I do not say that lightly. Sadly, the track has only been played 170 times live by the band, and if wondering, Ozzy Osbourne as a solo artist performed the song 6 times. So at number 14 is Symptom of the Universe. And also, Bill's Pants. Next up is another song from their 16th studio album, Dehumanizer, released in 1992 by IRS Records. This is, After All, The Dead. So the track opens with isolated and eerie guitar notes, along with bass guitar subtly backing up the riff. A couple short rounds of this, and then the abrupt punch of heavy chords, dramatic drums, and Dio's ominous and melodic vocal lines. It still maintains the slow creepiness at this point, but after almost 2 minutes, Dio's final note rings out, and we switch to the heavier main riff, brought in by cymbal counts, but then kicks in proper when drumming flips over to a relentless slam. It all builds to the pre-chorus and chorus, which maintain a relative slow and heavy pace, but here's where Ronnie's vocals bring in some of his shouty, melodic style, and some great and sympathetic lyrics here as well. Love the simplicity in his singing on the song title. I mean, it's cool, melodic, and a touch spooky. There is some intermittent background soloing throughout, so you might have to listen closely for some of that. Definitely worth the effort. However, there is more proper soloing in the end segment, alongside Dio singing the song title over and over, which takes us out with a slow fade. The song has been performed by the band approximately 46 times, and only during this album's tour. And of course, Dio, as a solo artist, also performed the track live about 14 times, and exclusively during his tour in 1996. Also, if you find any good cover versions of this, do let me know, because I couldn't even find one. Anyways, at number 13 is After All, The Dead. Next is another track from their 9th studio album, Heaven and Hell, released in 1980 by Warner Brothers. This is Die Young. So the track opens with eerie synth, giving way to a moaning and layered guitar passage, serving as an intro that jumps soon enough into a heavier and up-tempo riff. We get a short solo here, then Dio pops in with the verse lines sung in his grittier melodic voice. Guitar leads intermittently drop in throughout the verse part for accent, and then the pre-chorus comes in with Dio's ramped-up attack and some single power chords for effect. This is probably a good time to point out some of those amazing bass lines here. I mean, Geezer really is the master of runs and flourishes, and that's all over this track. Anyways, the pace drops down considerably for the chorus, which is almost haunting, with Dio's softer vocals, some bass accents, and distant guitar wails. The chorus transitions to a short synth line and then to a fantastically heavy and bombastic riff, alongside soloing and Dio's vocal embellishments, bringing us back to another run of the verse and pre-chorus. However, we get an alternate version of the chorus this time. It's far heavier, with varying vocal cadences and melody. Really love how the entire track builds up to this moment, which is my favorite part of the song. Such power and soul in Ronnie's voice, especially in that ending moment where he rapid fires off the song title, ending with a harsh growl on the final line. Very cool. Then with both guitar and bass soloing intertwined, track goes on with a slow fade. Anyways, this was a single from the album, number 3 to be exact, with a live version of Heaven and Hell as the B-side. It's also been covered by a few bands, notably Primal Fear on their Devil's Ground album from 2004. It's a competent cover, but it just doesn't match up with the original, obviously. As for that original, Black Sabbath has performed it a little over 250 times in concert, making it their 18th most played song ever. So this is my current favorite song on Heaven and Hell, which I alluded to before. So much going on here in terms of everyone contributing so well to the performance, but also the songwriting and the killer lyrics. Because of that change of favorites, I put this on my list a little bit higher than my original favorite, which is great too. It's why it's on my list as well, but just a little lower. So at number 12 is Die Young. Next up is another song from their fourth studio album, Volume 4, released in 1972 by Warner Brothers. This is Snowblind. So track opens with a quick run of power chords and ponderous single notes, then into a slow groove riff as Ozzy's smooth and sedate vocals take us through the verse. And the vocal speed is kind of an interesting choice considering the song is about a drug that makes you anything else but calm. But anyways, the slow groove is the dominant riff and provides much of that pace for the track. It's a mellow, heavy, and strangely trippy ride, especially the first bridge with a meandering acoustic riff following along with Ozzy's ballady vocals. The solo is likewise slow and melancholic, but also moody and with a bit of groove. Then it's back to the verse, and again, another Sabbath song with seemingly no chorus. That's kind of interesting. Then we get another bridge, which is slightly heavier and a little frenetic. Then to the final verse with some cool and again, kind of trippy soloing, this time taking us out with a slow fade. As the kids say, cocaine is one hell of a drug. And like cocaine, the song was also pretty popular, having been played live over 460 times, making it the 8th most performed song by the band. And yet, not a single track or appearing on any single as a B-side that I could find. But maybe a track about blow in 1972 was not at the top of Warner Brothers' list of things to promote. Just saying. Anyways, at number 11 is Snowblind. Next is a track from their 10th studio album, Mob Rules, released in 1981 by Warner Brothers. This is Turn Up the Night. So the track kicks right into gear with a cymbal 4 count and a relentlessly driving riff, followed by Dio's alternating gruff and melodic styles for the verses. A short solo follows and then leads to more verses. We've already heard Sabbath do this a bit, the whole sing and solo, then sing and solo thing. It works a lot of the time. Anyways, what follows is another Dio-era vocal pattern here of holding that final verse note to transition the song into the chorus riff. Speaking of the chorus, we mostly get the song title sung a few times, followed by more soloing. Did I mention the song is packed full of soloing moments? Because, yeah, lots of solos. Anyways, another run through the verse, but then a really cool ascending note segment that leads us to, well, another solo, but a really good one, so no worries. Then another verse and chorus follow, and it's clear by this point that Ronnie really varies up his vocal embellishments and cadences here, which I could definitely appreciate. You get a lot of that at the end of the track, which quickly fades out with, you guessed it, more soloing. Overall, really dig this track's up-tempo energy. So Turn Up the Night was the second single from this album, and we'll talk about the first single later on, to be sure. But as for Turn Up the Night single, it had Lonely Is the Word on the B-side. It only been performed 19 times live and only during this album's tour, which is a real shame because it's such a killer track. As for other bands doing this song, Night Demon covered Turn Up the Night on the B-side of their Black Widow single back in 2017. Catchy little cover though, lacks the punch of the original, but still worth hearing. So at number 10 is Turn Up the Night. Next up is another song from their 11th studio album, Born Again, released in 1983 by Warner Brothers. This is Zero the Hero. So to discuss Zero the Hero, it makes sense to briefly mention its intro entitled The Dark first. It's a lot of ambient moans and other eerie disturbances, but only a little over 30 seconds long, and it's hardly worth even giving a name to, but then Zero the Hero proper slowly fades into the mix, with guitar howls and a menacing bass line, the latter of which will be followed by guitar for a truly dark groove. After a snare roll, Gillan comes in with his metered and punchy verse vocals, which likewise add to the overwhelming dark tone of this track. Chorus riff and vocals are a variant of the verse, but also include some dramatic chords and elongated, echoey vocal notes, especially on the song title. Then we go another round with verse and chorus, a quick trip through the opening riff, the main riff, and then into the solo, which is somewhat eerie but also mellow, and about a minute and a half long. So if you like long solos, here you go. After that, it's back to the verse and chorus, followed by erratic soloing, more eerie synth, and other creepy effects closing out the track with a fade out. So although not a single on its own, Zero the Hero did appear as the B-side on the promo-only version of the Trash single. Zero the Hero was also covered by a few metal bands. And although Godflesh covered it, that version is god-awful, and you'd be better off with Cannibal Corpse's cover of the song from their Hammer Smashed Face EP from 1993. As for the original, it had been performed 62 times as a standalone track on the Born Again tour, and 17 times as part of a medley along with Symptom of the Universe and Sweet Leaf back in 1986. Also, Zero the Hero had a music video, which is hilariously low budget and a pretty fun watch as a result. So at number 9 is Zero the Hero. Next is another track from their 16th studio album, Dehumanizer, released in 1992 by IRS Records. This is Buried Alive. So a drum roll leads quickly into the main riff, full of chug and power with slow and menacing drums to back it up. Has a lot of that same driving menace that Zero the Hero has, to make a comparison. Dio's vocal attack is shouty and aggressive, but more melodic once we get to the pre-chorus and chorus, along with some effective vocal layering. That's followed by some deep and mournful soloing, then shifting gears to more up-tempo shred before quickly going back to the verse, pre-chorus, and chorus. Then we get some nice variation on riffs already established, a noticeable uptick in drumming, and Ronnie really turning up the aggression in the final lines. Then a fade out during the final solo. And as far as I know, the song never came out as a single, nor was in the set list for any of their tours, this one or the ones going forward. It had been played during soundcheck for the tour, oddly enough, but just not appearing in the actual set. I mean, I couldn't even find a band that covered it, so not a popular track in those regards, but certainly a deep cut well worth hearing. So at number 8 is Buried Alive. Next up is another song from their 10th studio album, Mob Rules, released in 1981 by Warner Brothers. This is The Mob Rules. So the track opens with an isolated riff that immediately shifts to add bass and drums with a simple shout from Dio. It's a mid-paced but heavy groove throughout, even with the riff change up for the chorus. Really love the dive bomb stop right before Ronnie shouts the song title in that chorus, and with a whole lot of echo on that vocal line to boot. Very cool. No real bridge in this track, just a lot of verse, chorus structure, but it works well for the song. Of course, we do get some soloing in there as well, a lot of classic note bends and quick fretwork throughout, with the bass line often keeping a galloping pace for much of the track. Also love when Ronnie loudly exclaims, "You're all fools," because you know he means it. Then more soloing to fade us out, per usual. This was the first single from the album, with a live version of Die Young on the B-side. It had been performed almost 300 times in a concert setting during the band's career, making it the 17th most played song on a Sabbath set list. And of course, it's also been covered by metal bands, including Iced Earth and Fozzy. And I know a lot of people like to pit this album against Heaven and Hell for favorite classic era Dio Sab album. As for me, I'm a Mob Rules guy for sure, but also have so many favorites on that other record as well that it's a pretty close race. Anyways, at number 7 is The Mob Rules. Next is another track from their 6th studio album, Sabotage, released in 1975 by Warner Brothers. This is Hole in the Sky. So the track kicks in with a heavy boogie riff and a bit of swing to it as well, but always with some crunch. Possibly one of Ozzy's better vocal performances here, which he hits and maintains some solid notes. So, bonus there. Love the shift to the chorus with Ozzy's dramatic vocal cadence and a nice riff variant underneath. Drumroll takes us back to another verse, and I always love the line, "Shooting's easy if you got the right gun." Yeah, love that. Also some great lyrics here overall. I even dig when Ozzy yells "yeah" right before the main solo. Speaking of that solo, it's a bit bluesier this time around, but also fits the track. Another verse follows, then the main riff returns, and then abruptly cuts off. Like, it just ends, as if someone lifted the needle off the record before the song was even over. Anyways, this track was the B-side to the Am I Going Insane radio single. Also been performed a scant 34 times live and just for the album tour. Of course, metal bands have covered the track, notably Metallica, Pantera, and Machine Head. There'll always be the Overkill live version that's my very favorite Hole in the Sky cover. You can find that on their Fuck You and Then Some compilation album from 1996. And gotta say, Sabotage is really one of my very favorite Sabbath albums, especially with the double punch of Symptom of the Universe and this track, and maybe all the musical weirdness that follows. Maybe Am I Going Insane is a bit of an odd man out sort of track, but maybe it also just adds to the strangeness of the record. You decide, I suppose. Anyways, at number 6 is Hole in the Sky. Next up is a song from their debut studio album, Black Sabbath, released in 1970 by Warner Brothers. This is N.I.B. Track starts with a distorted bass riff, but then is quickly joined by the rest of the band. Ozzy tends to spend a lot of this song in a lower register, perhaps adding to the lyrical content, which is clearly devoted to the devil himself. Some have labeled N.I.B. as their version of the Stones song Sympathy for the Devil, and in terms of content, you could make that case, though it's leaps and bounds more direct in its intent than the Rolling Stones song, if we're being honest. Also love how much of a role bass guitar has in this track, with the guitar often following along. Chorus slows things down a bit and also injects some tambourine. Yeah, tambourine. Sure, that's demonic. Anyways, no bridge in this song either, and we get what I'd call a false ending around the 6:30 mark, which sounds like a solo that's going to fade out, but it doesn't. Love the military snare moment, brief as it is. Interesting choice to just drop that in there, but it does transition the song back to the main riff well enough. Following this is the final verse and chorus, then ending things off with a solo and a live-sounding flourish from all. Also, in the verses, Ozzy is once more singing to the riff, and often enough that seems to be his thing, so here it is again. Ultimately, no big deal. Anyways, no single for this track, but it was a very popular live song for the band, having performed it 652 times, making it the 6th most played live track for Black Sabbath. Also, Ozzy Osbourne performed the song in his solo band, but only 43 times. N.I.B. has been covered by metal bands, though often enough not done really well. At the bottom of that barrel is likely Danzig's version from his 2015 album Skeletons. Yeah, not great. Anyways, at number 5 is N.I.B. Next is another track from their 5th studio album, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, released in 1973 by Warner Brothers. This is Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Track opens with an isolated crunching riff and then soon joined by the rest. Another great, heavy, classic Sab riff. After that, Ozzy's vocals come in strong and sharp with some melody as well. He also explores a higher range intermittently throughout this track, especially once we get near the end of the song. So high, in fact, that in the late 1990s, they had to kill these two segments of the song live because Ozzy couldn't hit the notes anymore. So yeah, they're really high. Anyways, a really solid, slow headbanging quality to the verse parts, slowed down further for the choruses, which have some almost Spanish acoustic playing to them, but also allows Ozzy to sing melodically a bit more. And I gotta admit, the guy really could sing when he wanted to. I definitely love how he ends a given chorus with his multi-noted attack on the word lies to match the riff. Anyways, some bluesy soloing commences while that pummeling riff rides along, after which point a sort of bridge kicks in, and it is definitely my favorite part of this song, hands down, with that filthy and brutal riffing, along with, as I mentioned, Ozzy's higher vocal ranging. After this bridge, we get to a final segment with a steady riff and chaotic soloing over top, then the track fades out. Anyways, there was a single for this track, along with the instrumental song Fluff on the B-side. Strangely, it had only been performed live a measly 166 times by the band, and 39 times by Ozzy as a solo artist. You'd think those numbers would have been at least a little higher, but the track has been covered quite a bit by such bands as Amon Amarth, Belphegor, and Candlemass, though the Anthrax version is still my very favorite of the bunch. You can find that on the I'm the Man single, as well as their Indian single. So at number 4 is Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Next up is another song from their 3rd studio album, Master of Reality, released in 1971 by Warner Brothers. This is Children of the Grave. Track starts off with a gallop riff alongside a building drum beat, and then kicks the whole thing in with some heavy stomp. Dig the alternating chorus riffing in between to break things up. Ozzy's vocals have some serious processing in them to make them sound bigger, possibly almost megaphone-ish. The lyrics are standard hippie activist claptrap, but that riff is so punishing. Again, another one that would easily make a top 10 Sab riff list. You can also catch Iommi playing some subtle synths in the background at times, adding a little spookiness to the mix. No real chorus in this one either, and I do dig when any band intelligently sidesteps traditional song structure, when it works, of course, and it certainly does here. Anyways, about mid-track, we get this breakdown bridge that simply crushes and is a more noticeable example of those synths I mentioned before. Again, they work pretty well. Then we get the final verse, which ends with the title of the song, and then some soloing, a flourish, and about 40 seconds of spooky and ambient sounds, with the title of the song quietly whispered in echoes, and then it all just fades out. So this is the main single from the album, along with Solitude on the B-side. It's been performed a whopping 958 times, making this the 5th most played song on a Sabbath setlist. And as you can imagine, a slew of metal bands have covered Children of the Grave, including Master, White Zombie, Gravedigger, Tyrant, Racer X, Amon Amarth, and many, many others. So at number 3 is Children of the Grave. Next is yet another track from their third studio album, Master Reality, released in 1971 by Warner Brothers. This is Sweet Leaf. So the track begins with a sample of a repeating cough, quickly jumping to the main riff, a super distorted and utterly heavy note-bending riff, coasting smoothly underneath Ozzy's almost crooning vocals, which kind of fits as is certainly a love letter to marijuana. And even as a kid, I thought the idea of Ozzy singing to a joint was utterly hysterical. I mean, the lyric, "I love you, sweet leaf, though you can't hear," is literally something you would say if completely stoned. Anyways, about mid-track comes a segment that picks up things considerably with some pulsating bass lines, galloping drums, and some seriously sweet soloing. After a short but thick transitional riff, we go back to the main riff and the final verse, which is to say, again, no real choruses here. Track fades out with that main riff and Ozzy proselytizing to the masses to just try it out. So this track was a single along with Lord of This World as the B-side, and it's funny how a single about pot flies in the early 70s, but not a cocaine song, at least until Clapton, I guess. Be that as it may, the song had been performed almost 300 times live, making it the 16th most played song for the band in concert. And of course, many, many metal bands have covered this one, including Candlemass, Sacred Reich, Agent Steel, and others. And to clarify a little bit here, although this is my second favorite Black Sabbath song, I really do hate pot. I mean, I can't stand the smell of it. I hate the feeling of being high on it and all of that. It's legal now in the States, so it's everywhere here, but it just has no appeal to me whatsoever. But, that's just me. At any rate, it's an awesome song that loses nothing for me due to lyrical content. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it. Anyways, at number 2 is Sweet Leaf. Next up is another song from their debut studio album, Black Sabbath, released in 1970 by Warner Brothers. This is, of course, Black Sabbath. Track opens with the sound of pouring rain, intermittent thunder, and a distant tolling bell. And needless to say, this very start to a song would be massively copied by scores of metal bands in the decades to come, right up to modern day. Anyways, the storm lasts about 37 seconds, and then the crushing doom begins. Those 3 simple chords, known as the Devil's Tritone, are literally the sound of heavy metal's creation. And that's not hyperbole. It all starts right here. Anyways, that's on purpose, of course, and Iommi even inverted the tritone to capture a more sinister sound. All of this in 1970. Amazing. So after the bell and tritone riffing, the track settles into a quieter and more ominous mode, giving the drums some space to set a slow and almost ritual vibe. Then Ozzy comes in with the opening line, "What is this that stands before me?" And I can imagine all those hippie kids back then not knowing what the hell to do with all this. And I love that. After the first verse, that crushing tritone returns with tolling bells right behind, then alternating back to another portentous verse. Still have the exclamation, "Oh no, no, please God help me," right before the chorus punches in again. Then in the last minute and a half, the track radically shifts tempo and mood when it jumps to a gallop riff that throws in a bit of anticipation, either for the devil or the final riff segment, because that last minute has some seriously killer soloing, along with weird, trippy keyboards for effect. Then the track ends with a military-like riff flourish and then stops. The track had been performed over 1,000 times by the band live, making it the 4th most played track from their set list. Also, no real official single for this song, but Warner Brothers did put out an odd 1-minute radio spot on a 7-inch promo single that plays a bit of the track with a voiceover explaining the band. Hard to get it on the original vinyl, but it is on YouTube if you want to check it out. It's called Radio Spot for Black Sabbath. And of course, scores of metal bands have covered this song, including Vader, Acheron, and Iced Earth. But my very favorite cover version of Black Sabbath, hands down, is the Typo Negative one, which is found on the Nativity in Black, a tribute to Black Sabbath compilation album from 1994, mentioned earlier. So my number 1 favorite Black Sabbath song is Black Sabbath. So I'm sure the more observant of you out there noticed the absence of tracks from the band's second studio album, Paranoid, including its very famous title track. Truth be known, I've never really loved Paranoid. I mean, I like the album, that's why I own the box set for it, but it's never contained my favorite Sabbath songs. Funny enough, Paranoid was the first Sabbath album I ever heard, having borrowed it from a friend back in 1983 when I was a kid, but it really didn't grab me, and it really took hearing another Black Sabbath album, namely Master Reality, to really pull me into this band. But I still dig Paranoid, it just doesn't rank as high for me as many other records from them. So that's the story. Also, some of you might have picked up on how many Dehumanizer tracks I included, and this really is my way of saying that I feel this album is vastly underrated in their catalog. It is so crushing and heavy, and some of the best material Dio and Iommi and Butler ever wrote together. If you haven't heard it in a while, you should do so very, very soon. Killer record. So I'm sure many of you feel differently about some of the choices I made here. You should let me know your favorite Black Sabbath songs, maybe come up with your own top 10 or top 20. Definitely let me know that and anything else this video brought to mind in the comments below. Of course, if this video is your introduction to my channel and you know nothing else of what I do, my name is Matt. This is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on classic and modern metal, as well as metal vinyl collecting. If you haven't subscribed to my channel and you dig what I'm talking about, you should definitely do that. Subscribe, it's great. Also, maybe like this video and share out my videos in general with some of your friends on social media. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.